This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the weekly Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. This is the show for May 7th, 2019, and I'm your host, Darren McKee. With me, as usual, are Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
Christina Roach.
Go Raps.
And producer Pat.
Hi, Checkers.
We have a great show for you today. Christina is going to look into whether aura readings are cool again. I'm going to discuss comedy non-disclosure agreements. And then Adam is going to look at how well websites track your browsing history. But first, Adam is going to talk to us about gaslighting and a comment he received.
Yeah, just a little follow-up. Obviously, I talked about gaslighting last week for anyone who listens to the show in chronological order. So the comment's from Dean Meservey on our blog, and he said, I enjoyed Adam's gaslighting segment, but I had the uncomfortable feeling throughout that maybe none of the checkers had actually seen the play or movie. The villain did not simply try to hide his activity by convincing his wife she imagined the lights to have dimmed. Rather, he increasingly controlled her by persuading her that she was insane. The reality was in fact her own delusion. For example, he gave her an expensive gift that she cherished. He then surreptitiously stole it and put it in an odd place. When she became distressed that it had been stolen, he helped her find it. An object would vanish and he would remind her she had hidden it because he had seen her do it. Always with the most loving of concern. He would offer to take her out, and then when she was dressed and ready to go, he would look baffled and remind her that they had been out the night before. Don't you remember, darling? Soon, whenever something peculiar happened, all he would have to do is express his love and concern. She came to trust the abuser to interpret reality for her because she could no longer trust her own mind. While gaslighting, as Adam correctly points out, has indeed taken on vastly diluted meanings in recent years throughout my 60-plus years on Earth, and in my counseling experience, I have understood it to mean a specific form of mental abuse in which the abuser turns the tables on the abused, causes her, sometimes him, but usually her, to question her ability to perceive reality and convince her that she, not he, is the problem. An example might be covering up adultery by getting the spouse to believe that she has trust issues and her irrational jealousy is threatening the marriage. When she no longer trusts her instincts, she doesn't dare question his suspicious behavior anymore, and he has effectively neutralized her. Is Donald Trump gaslighting America? Probably not, because I don't think he's that clever. You have to be smart and manipulative to gaslight. And I like this last part. President Trump, I think, is just the 3-year-old who says things that aren't true because he wishes they were. You know, you catch him standing there on the chair. He scooted over to reach the shelf. You're looking at the cookie crumbs around his mouth. The shattered cookie jar is on the floor with the cookies still rolling in circles. And still, he didn't do it. The boy isn't lying. He just hasn't quite learned how reality works. I miss having presidents who knew how reality works.
Wasn't me, folks. Fake news.
Love the show and never miss it. Keep it up.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, I really appreciate that comment because no, I had not seen the movie and I don't think anyone else on the show had. And that's an important clarification because I did mention sort of that, well, the lights were being dimmed because he was looking for something in the attic, and that he wasn't really trying to cause her distress. That wasn't the main point of dimming the lights, but actually it turns out he really was. So, that's an important factor in the sort of textbook case that the manipulation is deliberate. So something important to consider when you're thinking, is something really gaslighting?
Thanks, Adam. And thanks, you listeners, for writing in. It's always great when we hear from you, and sometimes you'll be covered on the show.
Oh, yeah.
And now we turn to Christina, who might read my aura because it's cool again. Isn't that right?
A guilty pleasure of mine on weekend mornings is to chill, reading fitness and fashion magazines on my iPad while I drink my coffee. So I was flipping through the May issue of a fitness mag called Shape. And I saw an article that got me so fired up, I had to cover it this week. It was titled, Who Aura You? First line, getting your aura photographed and read is a hot trend. Oh, awesome. Aura reading is back en vogue. Now, the last time I heard about auras and aura readings, I was at a party in the mid-90s, and the guy hosting it claimed he could read auras, and this consisted of him waving his arms a couple of feet away from your back, so kind of like Reiki, but you're standing. Shape asked their so-called experts to explain the philosophy. Quote, your aura is the electromagnetic field around you, thought to protect you from picking up other people's thoughts and emotions, according to Katerina Chmiel, co-owner of the Family of Light Holistic Center in New York. It's like the energy version of your immune system. It changes in response to what's going on in your life and your mental state. There is so much bullshit to unpack here. I can't even. Now, in order to photograph your aura, you place each hand on a metal plate with sensors that read your energy field, and it converts it to colors that are picked up by a camera. Those colors are then interpreted by a trained aura reader. The article describes what each aura color is supposed to represent, and shockingly, no consistency with other descriptions from other sources of what the colors represent. But let's stick with what the shape article lists. So red is a sign of hard worker prone to stress. Green is a color of change and love that appears when relationships are in transition. Orange is the color of fun-loving, independent creatives. Blue, an apparent sign of sensitivity and sympathy. Yellow related to success, and purple related to spirituality and intuition. Now, Shape got their staff to get their auras read as part of this article, and a couple expressed some skepticism, but none, to my dismay, outright called it a bunch of hooey. And I think there were 6 people that had it done, or 5.
I think you then get fired from working at Shape.
Their editorial assistant said, quote, "My reading was pretty accurate. The reader asked if I was facing a change, and I am starting Whole30. That's a whole other thing. That's a fad diet. Anyway. Oh my God. But I'm still a skeptic. She did say I have money in my future. Fingers crossed." One of their writers said...
It's like a friggin' horoscope.
Yeah. "I had low expectations until she said the faded color around my midsection indicated stomach problems. I'd recently seen a GI specialist. My mind was blown." To no one's surprise anywhere, when I checked out Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop site, her and her staff had their aura readings done as well. I feel like Goop is the BS marker. You go to their site to see if they're plugging something. It almost confirms it's bunk. It's like the anti-Snopes.
That's funny.
This, of course, is pseudoscience nonsense, and the same type of cold reading technique used by psychics, mediums, general-purpose scam artists to make it seem like they know much more about a person than they do. Aura readings are also known as Kirlian readings or Kirlian readings. A 2011 Wired article titled "Aura Portraits Make Good Art, Bad Science" explains aura photography dates back to 1939, when Russian scientist Semyon Kirlian accidentally discovered that placing an object on a photographic plate connected to a source of high voltage produced an image of the object surrounded by a contoured glow. Now, Wired magazine suggests this is a similar effect to putting your hand on a plasma globe or a sphere. Now, to be clear, I'm no physicist, but all objects, including our bodies, emit electromagnetic radiation. This is not a supernatural phenomenon, but parts of the wonders we call science. Now, as Wikipedia explains, studies find that Kirlian effect is caused by moisture being present on the object being photographed. So, although parapsychologists, so pseudoscience once again, and the like suggest that these images show levels of psychic ability.
Oh, wow.
But here's the deal. Quote, "Supernatural interpretations of these images have often been the result of a lack of understanding of the simple natural phenomena behind them, such as heat emanating from a human body producing aura-like images under infrared photography. After rigorous experimentations, no mystery process has been discovered in relation to Kirlian photography." Now, aura readings have been beyond debunked over the years, but like psychic readings, they don't seem to go away. And articles like this in magazines that purport to promote legit health and wellness certainly isn't helping. How many people have read this thing and thought, "Oh, wow, that's cool, gonna get my aura read"? It is so frustrating to me. And honestly, full disclosure, I was one of these people when I was a teenager. I wish I had TRC back in the day. These weren't deeply held beliefs I had about astrology or auras. It's just some crap people told me. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. So some logic and facts would really have steered me in the right direction. Now, I really recommend checking out the 3-minute James Randi video I linked to, where he gets an aura reader to prove, quote unquote, his ability. And the wiki is great too, because it touches upon various attempts at proving the existence of auras scientifically, which have all met with failure.
Nice.
However, interesting footnote, guys. I came across this near the end of putting the segment together, and I'm glad that I did, because there is potentially a scientific explanation for why some people think they can read auras. And more recent research suggests that at least some individuals who claim to see people's so-called aura actually have a neurological condition called synesthesia. Do you guys know what that is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good job. Yep.
Synesthesia causes the brain to process data in the form of several senses at once. And another fun fact that I only found out today, Billy Joel, the musician, experiences this. He claims in an article with Psychology Today that when he hears or makes ballads, he senses blues and greens. And when he's working on rockier tracks, reds, oranges, and golds. Pretty wild.
Now, so I certainly get that certain people may see, in a sense, that their brain interprets something as being sort of an aura of color around a person. But for them to go from that to link that color to a trait, well, there's no basis in reality for that, right?
Well, to be charitable, most people have no understanding how the brain works whatsoever.
Sure.
So the idea that there are 5, maybe 6 senses, they'll accept that in the broad sense. But how the brain processes in a neural sense, like how you transduce stimuli from the environment to electrical signals in your brain, and some of those can be crossed over such that you perceive 1 or 2 sense modalities at the same time. What? As opposed to like, oh, well, I heard their voice and it sounded yellow and I saw a bit of yellow, so it must be their aura.
Yeah.
Like that actually makes more sense to the average person, I assume, than some complicated neuroscience explanation.
I think when we had Ed Robertson on the show, the 5 Minutes with an Astronomer show, which we will play on TRC coming up, he basically explained a cold reading, and he did a really good job of it. And it's just this vague explanation that could apply to a lot of different people that almost anyone could see themselves in.
Ed Robertson. Name sounds familiar.
Thanks, Christina. And now I want to talk to you about comedy show non-disclosure agreements and the genetic fallacy. Perhaps you've seen some headlines such as, "Suddenly Louis C.K. cares about consent when it comes to bad jokes." This is from Jezebel. Or, "Louis C.K. does not consent to you sharing his material." Subheading, "The disgraced comedian is going to new extremes to keep his public performances secret." That was from GQ.
Okay.
These articles describe a notice on the Acme Comedy Company's website regarding Louis C.K.'s upcoming shows there, and I'm going to read this in full. The Louis C.K. performance at the Acme Comedy Co. will be a phone-free experience. Use of cell phones, smartwatches, smart accessories, cameras, or recording devices will not be permitted in the performance space. Upon arrival at the venue, all phones and smartwatches will be secured in yonder pouches and will be opened at the end of the event. Guests maintain possession of their phones at all times and can access their phones throughout the show at designated phone use areas in the venue. All phones will be resecured in yonder pouches before returning to the performance space. Anyone seen using a cell phone during the performance will be escorted out of the venue. We appreciate your cooperation in creating a phone-free viewing experience. Louis C.K. owns all rights in the content and materials, including any jokes and sketches, the materials, delivered during his performance. The materials may not be copied, translated, transmitted, displayed, distributed, or reproduced verbatim, in whole or in part, in any form, media, or technology now known or later developed without the express prior written consent of Louis C.K. Any use of the materials without the express prior written consent of Louis C.K. is strictly prohibited and shall be subject to available legal remedies, whether in equity or at law, at the cost of anyone who violates this prohibition.
Wow.
Wow.
No,
I
stringent.
can see the first couple of paragraphs that you read,
Yep.
but to add the owns all rights in the content material, the whole legalese stuff,
Yes, exactly.
that's surprising to me.
So both Jezebel and GQ thought it downright preposterous that Louis C.K. would do such a thing. And these
He's
are
certainly the first person to ever do it, right?
Well, before you move on, Darren, have you guys never been to a show where your phone's been locked in one of those magnetic bags?
I went to see a sneak preview clip of the second Transformers movie at one of the BotCons, and they took everyone's cell phones away. That's the closest, but I don't go to a lot of...
Yeah, I don't get out that much, but I'm aware this exists.
Yeah.
Well, so
This is not news.
Yeah, we went to see Dave Chappelle, and they locked our phones in these bags.
Right.
We might have seen other shows as well, but at least Dave Chappelle. Yeah.
It's becoming welcome to 2019.
Yeah.
I mean, Mumford and Sons did it when they performed in Niagara, Ontario. The problem is it can cause a lot of traffic issues of people getting out. But from our experience, as much as I was like, ugh, when we did it at Danforth Music Hall in Toronto, when we saw Chappelle, it was pretty quick. They put it in this thing, and it was actually quite a nice experience that no one had phones out.
But I'm sure Darren's main point is the second part of that, which I don't remember seeing at all.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly that. And let's be honest, some people just don't like Louis C.K.
Of course.
And this segment that I'm doing is not about whether Louis C.K. was good or bad, but it's trying to lead up to the idea of whether that should matter in this particular case. So they say Louis C.K. has gone too far, his material is lame anyway, and to quote Jezebel, and I don't want to feed the outrage machine, but I did find this kind of annoying, quote, men like Ansari, this is Aziz Ansari, and Louis C.K. have had an easier time making a comeback, largely because many comedy clubs have been so welcoming and are eager to put restrictions in place on audiences to make disgraced comedians feel safer. But putting these limitations on comedy audiences is ridiculous. Let's pause there for a moment. Well, you don't have to go see the comedy club show. All those shows are sold out. I don't think the audience cares much. And they say like they're sort of like everyone's being harmed in some way versus everyone's willingly engaging in a choice. Like the comedy club chose to have Louis C.K. Louis C.K. is choosing to perform there. Someone is choosing to go see Louis C.K. At least now, when he was just popping up somewhere, that's not quite the same thing. So that's a fair point. So then, this is back to Jezebel. Quote, comedians, no matter how famous, try out new material all the time in front of live audiences, and sometimes those jokes make their way to social media or the press. If you are, let's say, a comedian who has been accused of sexual misconduct quite publicly, and then choose to joke about those things in your set, then all of that is fair game to report on and repeat. What exactly is to be spoiled in a Louis C.K. set? Boring jokes about young people and their gender pronouns? The kind of take that originates from the worst corners of right-wing social media? You can get that for free. The irony here is that Louis C.K. suddenly cares about consent, but only when it comes to his precious material. Enacting mini NDAs of sorts on his paying fans is a gross abuse of power for someone already accused of grossly abusing his power in more insidious ways. So, his paying fans can choose to pay him and sign this or abide by this NDA or not. And I think she hits on a very important point that comedians do test out material in public. And it's a different type of art performance, I believe, than many other, such that they're not usually in these situations always performing a completely worked out set. They are literally workshopping materials, and some of it's going to be bad and not good, and even they will think it is not funny. So I think, and this is where it depends if you want to give someone the benefit of the doubt or not, it's whether you think all of this should be available to people looking at someone's work in progress and being open to criticism. And I guess there's some sort of First Amendment versus a private citizen's agreement about buying a contract or not. But all that to say, neither of these articles actually address the issue of whether people should be allowed to record a comedian's material and put it on the internet, and why or why not that is an issue. Which, to be fair, is not their purpose. These articles, they just want to criticize Louis C.K., and that's fine. That's what they exist for. But here at the Reality Check, we care about the validity of ideas regardless of where they come from, which leads us to the concept of committing a genetic fallacy. The basic idea is that the source or history of an idea is attacked instead of a proposition being addressed. And I think that's what's happening here. Do you evaluate a premise or an idea on its merits, or do you bring in other contextual factors? Yeah. And I also implicit here is like, well, do we treat everyone equally or not, right? Because that's also what is implied. Now, to be fair, not everyone is ignoring this idea of what's a decent premise or not. And to quote Vulture, their headline is, Louis C.K. is doing everything in his power to keep you from recording his sets. Which, I guess legally he's doing it. He's not holding anyone down. But this was by Bethy Squires, and this is a quote from the article. Taping without consent is a real problem for comedians. Once a joke is recorded, it's considered pretty much dead. You can't make money off your dead material, which is possibly why Conan writer Laurie Kilmartin agrees with the copyright disclaimer, but strongly disagrees with Louis C.K. still being booked in clubs. She tweeted, Louis is a piece of shit, and the comedy business still sucks, but co-sign on this copyright stuff.
Yeah.
Even if you don't like a particular instance, perhaps Louis C.K. doing this, I think there should be general rules that apply to everyone equally. And this is now where I open up to the panel to see what they think about all this.
There's so much to unpack there.
Well, Bill Burr complains about this all the time. And Pat and I are huge comedy nerds. We love stand-up comedy. And that's one of the things that we really enjoy going to see all the time. And it's a common complaint from all of them being filmed or taped when they're testing out their stuff, especially in these smaller clubs where it seems people can kind of get away with it.
The two biggest points in my mind are, number one, can you separate the art from the person? If the art is good, but the person has done things that aren't necessarily good, does that mean the art is therefore bad? And number two, if someone does something that's not good, and I think we could all agree that what Louis C.K. did was not good,
Correct.
but was not something they were convicted of or sent to jail for, should they therefore lose their livelihood? Specifically with regards to NDAs, my view is if he's putting on a performance, I think he can set the rules by which he does that performance. And if you don't like it, don't go.
That's how I feel.
Yeah.
If I could love we didn't have to go see Dave Chappelle if we had a problem with putting our phones
right.
in a pouch, but
Did you know
I'm glad I went.
Did you know ahead of time that was going to happen?
yes.
Okay.
Right.
Then-
So I
then
think
that's
I think this is the advance notice. This is where
Yeah.
the consent comes in. I also think, to what extent, and this is where you want to give someone the benefit of the doubt, is Louis C.K. going to sue someone over one tweet that paraphrases or almost quotes him for one of his acts? I doubt it, but technically it means he could. But I think it's the issue of what happened last time, supposedly, when someone recorded the entire set and leaked it. And now, like, can he use any of that? Maybe not.
Basically, if you say we're taking away all your cell phones and then during the performance he sees there's someone in the audience that whips out a cell phone, well, security can very easily take that person out of the establishment. Yeah. That may be his way of sort of controlling that situation. Is Louis C.K. doing this to avoid getting smeared on social media by people who aren't going to want to go see a show anyway, or is this really an intellectual property thing? I don't know.
I think that's a decent point. And some articles like, yeah, he's just doing that to avoid this, and his jokes were bad because he talked about the Parkland shooters and these other issues which are a bit, base or vulgar. You're like, well, Louis C.K. is vulgar and he says absurd things.
He's always been like
exactly, and he's often trying to point out the absurdity of how we don't care enough about starving people who are all terrible in different ways. But things he'll say can make a lot of people recoil. But like, well, that's his shtick, and some people like it and some people don't. So I doubt he's doing that for, public image management at this point.
Well, certainly stuff that we saw when Dave Chappelle played in Toronto ended up on his Netflix specials months later. Mm-hmm. So that would have sucked if those bits had gotten out. And there's something to be said for, I can relay the joke to you poorly. Or I could show you a video of it or a recording, and that really would ruin it.
Well, and the material, people perfect their material over years, right? Yeah. So if that just gets diluted like that.
Well, it's not just that. From what I understand now, with the Netflix specials that are being offered for millions of dollars, comedians typically have a set of material that they perform for 1 to 2 years. Yeah. They record the Netflix special at the end of their tour. Then the comedy's dead. The Netflix special goes out. You don't usually see it again in live performance. And I do wonder if people would feel differently if, like, Netflix, as the corporate hegemon, says, like, well, you can't do this anymore. Because this is our property. It's going to be. And if people would actually feel differently about it, they're like, well, I like Netflix, and that makes sense from a Netflix business point of view, which of course is the same thing. It's just that they're buying the material from the comedian, who is sort of a wholly owned subsidiary themselves to some extent.
I would hope the comedian wouldn't sign that contract.
Well, but it might be to their best interest. We're going to give you $10 million if you perform this material and it seems decent after you.
Sure. It's a second revenue stream, right?
And it is definitely a thing now for a comedian. Comedians have almost competitively started to do a year of touring and throw everything out at the end of it.
Yeah.
It's become a thing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then they gotta come up with new material by going around and shopping routines at small performances and seeing what sticks and what doesn't, and hopefully none of it ends up on Twitter.
I'm sure that someone would correct me, but the first time I saw a comedian throw out their material was Seinfeld when he did the I'm Telling You for the Last Time. And it seems almost after that, it was people like Bill Burr that were like, I'm going to tour this for a year and then I'm going to throw it away. It really became a thing after that.
Which is funny because Seinfeld is one of those tradish guys who actually redoes quite a big portion of
We've
his
seen him
stand-up.
several times, and he's like, which joke do you want to hear from my past? Yeah.
Which joke? I can't do it. Darren can do it.
But I think it actually would have been funnier for you to do it, Christina, poorly. sometimes when I'm using the internet, it seems like certain websites present me with ads based on information that I would have given to other websites or searches. Adam, how well can websites track my browsing history?
That's a great question, Darren. Websites, they sure do seem to know a lot about you. You search for a lawnmower on a search engine or a store, then an unrelated website gives you ads for lawnmowers.
Surprise.
A mild annoyance when it's a lawnmower, but potentially dangerous if it's a gift for your spouse and they're looking at your device, or alternatively, some more saucy content. There are a lot of ways sites can track you, but also some ways which people think they might be tracking them, which they mostly don't because they don't need to. So first, let's dispel some myths. A lot of people repeat the idea that Facebook uses your phone's microphone to listen to your conversations and give you targeted ads. So for example, if I'm chatting with a person about my favorite sports team, all of a sudden I'll see ads for that team's jersey or tickets or whatever sports people buy. A lot of people are very convinced that this has happened to them, citing some specific example where something was said and then an ad showed up right afterwards. But it doesn't really happen that way. Facebook has repeatedly stated that they do not do this, and they don't really need to. Now, some confusion may have come from the fact that their new Identify TV and Music Instantly feature, which listens to music or TV clips during a status update so that you can say, I'm listening to whatever song or TV show, might have led to this. This isn't sending any audio data to Facebook, but instead creating a fingerprint of the sound and matching it to a database Facebook has. They claim not to store these fingerprints, and they also only use the mic at a specific time when that status update is being posted when you're listening for the TV show or music.
And Facebook is so trustworthy. Why wouldn't you trust them, right?
So they say it. That doesn't mean it's true, but for some technical reasons, it doesn't seem to be true. When people claim it, it doesn't seem to make sense, and it's not really necessary. Now, some of these conversations turned to ads could just be coincidence. If a sporting event is going on tonight, I might mention it, and it would be smart for me to get an ad for it if I live close, and that doesn't need to have listened to my conversation. More likely, they know of your interest from other ways of tracking you. Maybe they know that I've been to this sporting event before, or searched on another website about it. So just how is this tracking happening? A lot of it is through tracking cookies. Now, an HTTP cookie is a small amount of data which is sent from a website and stored in the web browser on your device, that being your computer, your smartphone, your tablet, whatever you're using to get online. Cookies allow websites to have a state. So they're designed to, for example, keep a shopping cart populated with items, log you into a message board or some specific website. These are usually the cookies which match the domain name of the site you're visiting. So if I go to trcpodcast.com and I log in, then it's really just a cookie to keep me logged in to that specific website. Similarly, even sites like Facebook and Google use their own cookies to do things like log you into those sites. But they also have cookies elsewhere on the internet to track you. These tracking cookies are a huge part of what's going on with your browser. A third-party cookie is a cookie that isn't originating from the website you are visiting. For example, if you go to my website, SailorMoonNews.com, you'll get cookies for Amazon and Google because there are some Amazon ads on the site, and there's code for Google Analytics, which gives a webmaster the data on who's visiting their website. It's actually not that many trackers, but there are a couple. Practically speaking, Amazon and Google will keep track of a person if they visit that site and any other site that will have those same tracking cookies on it. The main types of these cookies you see will be advertising cookies. So these are things like Amazon ads that I mentioned, and you might notice that there are quite a few other ads on the internet. It can also be in a social media widget. So if you embed tweets on a page, like the embedded tweets on trcpodcast.com, can cause Twitter to be able to track you when you go to our website. A Facebook like or share button could do the same. Using platform's comment sections embedded within your web page can also allow people to be tracked like that. And then there's analytics. So as I mentioned, Google Analytics, that was one. So if you have a bit of code that you put on your website to be able to gather more information about the users who are visiting your website, well, it's good for you because you get that benefit, but it's also good for the person who's providing those analytics because they'll take that user data and do something with it.
Now, you said a bit of code.
Yep.
To what extent is it all a bit of code? Meaning you have a cookie, you have a widget, you have code on a platform to do X, Y, Z.
It could be as little as remote loading an image on your website, and then they'll be able to get the cookie through that. So, for example, if I'm putting an Amazon ad on my site, I do an iframe, which like embeds a frame from Amazon in my site.
You're going to have to break down those words.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Someone trying to post an ad within their website. So the content from the ad doesn't come from my actual website. It has to be loaded off of a third party's website, and you see it in the web page. So if you go to a news site, there's usually a lot of these for a news site. But like I mentioned, it's all these little things. I have a little embedded tweet in the article I'm talking about. All of a sudden they've tracked you. Or I embed a YouTube video into my article. Well, now Google and YouTube can see anything else from the user accessing that page, and they can track it to other sites.
So for the sake of trying to simply answer Darren's question, Adam, you can correct me if I'm wrong on any of this because you've done the research, but essentially when you go to a web page, you're getting a bunch of code. That's exactly what's happening. And then the web browser is interpreting it. One of the things that it can interpret is setting various cookie settings, which then get stored. And so that's what we're talking about. Darren, is that maybe clearer?
Yeah, and as you said it, of course, I'm like, it's all code. I mean, it's hard to sometimes for I don't live and breathe computers. You're like, well, of course it's code. The video's code, the photos are code, the text is code. It's all code. It's just so well done. It looks like it's other things.
Right. It's just basically something that a web browser can do as part of that interpretation of code is to set cookies in memory, and there are a bunch of different reasons that it can do that. So it can store your password, so the next time that you come back, it remembers who you are, or for advertising reasons.
Absolutely right, Pat.
Yep.
It's good. It's a good way to put it.
Now, I really love cookies, but why is this called a cookie?
I believe cookie is a term that comes from a Unix term referring to magic cookies, which is just sort of a token, though I think some people believe it references actual breadcrumbs. So sites are able to put together quite a bit of information about someone's browsing history, which will allow them to be more efficient at targeting them with certain ads. That's, at the end of the day, there has to be a monetary business reason for it. So you may very well be seeing ads on one website related to content you viewed on another. If you don't expect that link to happen, then you may suspect that websites are listening to your microphone or doing some advanced image recognition on your photos or something of the sort. But this isn't really necessary. They can just track you with your cookies, and they can know quite a bit about you. So what can you do about it? Well, blocking third-party cookies through your web browser is usually an option, and it's a pretty good idea. So on my computer, I use Safari, which blocks them by default, and it is a setting. But Google Chrome, Mozilla Firefox, and Internet Explorer do have options to block them as well, so go around your preferences for your web browser. You should be able to see that. I use DuckDuckGo as my search engine, and they have a phone browser which blocks tracking cookies and gives me an indication of what sites tried to track me, which I find enlightening. So it gives me a nice idea of, it gives like a score to a web page, and you can see exactly what was blocked. And there's quite a bit on some web pages. It's always a bit tricky for someone to determine just how much security they want to use. Blocking all cookies is likely overkill, as many websites will need them to have you legitimately log in and just do business. You won't be able to buy something from Amazon if you're blocking all of their cookies. But blocking third-party cookies is probably a smart idea. There's probably not a lot of benefit to it. But maybe you actually like having targeted ads. It's like, I'm really tired of seeing ads for products that I'm not interested in. I wish they would look at my browsing history and tell me exactly what I want to buy.
They really need to work on the I already bought the thing, don't give me the ad automated technology.
For sure. If the machines want to take over the world, they got to stop giving me ads for the product.
Of course, the solution is like, we'll just tell them you've bought it. I'm like, no, I don't want them to access my bank account.
Well, Amazon will not give you ads for something you've already bought. But like if I buy something on Amazon CA and then Amazon.com doesn't know, and then they give me an ad for the same Sailor Moon DVD.
We noticed you bought these shoes 3 years ago. They've probably worn out. Would you like new shoes?
That's a little better. Occasionally clearing your browser's cookies on your computer or other device is a decent idea. They'll be warned that this will log you out of certain websites. But some people can get very attached to their cookies, get very mad when their cookies are cleared. Some people will say, I love clearing my cookies. But if you don't remember all your passwords through maybe a program to save your passwords, like we mentioned in a previous show, there's also a do not track setting, which you can set on your browser, though it is up to the website you visit whether or not they actually listen to that do not track setting. People are looking at maybe having some sort of rules to enforce that or some legislation to enforce that. But for now, it's really please don't track me. And no, we don't care. We want to track you. It makes us money. Now, there are also browser extensions which can be used to block advertisers which use tracking cookies. So some of them will specifically target with a blacklist certain advertisers. Some will be based on the behavior. There's a lot of sophisticated ways you can do it. But this isn't the only way that sites can track you, so that alone won't help you. There are other ways, many of which can still be done through private browsing or incognito mode, a popular way of browsing pornographic websites, which is mostly useful for avoiding tracking your history locally on a computer that you expect someone else might use, but not for hiding your tracks online, so people can still see what you're doing when you're doing that. Now, a site can track you by IP address, which is unique usually to your internet connection. So my home, for example, will connect from one IP address, even though there are multiple devices in my home used by multiple users. But my workplace may have a single IP shared across a large number of people. So that IP address can be more or less useful depending on what they're trying to track. A VPN can help block an IP address if you're concerned about that. A newer method of tracking is browser fingerprinting. Now, this uses information about your browser, such as the version, the language, time zone, and screen resolution to create a profile for you. You may think you won't be able to do an accurate profile of a person with that kind of information. But with enough data points, they can uniquely identify you. And then it's hard to hide some of these settings when disabling broadcasting those settings could have a negative impact of the quality of your browsing.
I read an article about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I thought, this is utter BS until I really dug in, and it's kind of remarkable what they can tell about you.
Yeah, it's kind of scary because there's, I just named a few, but there's a lot of data points there. And it's one of these like, well, maybe I want to hide what version of my browser is, but if I hide my screen resolution and then web pages are like rendering improperly because I'm not able to share this information, but I'm worried that my security can be compromised because of it. It's a little tricky, but at the end of the day, it's also, there's the risk of, how much tracking do I want to allow? How convenient is being private online versus what is the cost and inconvenience of it? And at the end of the day, sometimes that cost is just, I get more targeted ads, which, it's a little creepy knowing someone knows your browser history, but is it that bad? Your own judgment call. And there are other ways that specific websites may be able to track you. For example, I found an article which had links showing how to find out what Google has on me. And they had a lot of information about my browsing history, of course, as well as my searches. But since Google owns so much else, and they have, for example, my YouTube search and viewing history. This was mostly Baby Shark videos and Detective Pikachu trailers, but there could be more in there, right? More troubling was what they knew about my location history. Now, I knew that this happened when I had an Android phone and I turned on the options because I didn't really care at the time. And they didn't have any location information on me until about 2 months ago. And then they had daily information about where I was going. And I'm pretty sure this is because I turned on location tracking from Pokemon Go, because this allowed the app to count the distance I walked while the app was off, because it gave me rewards such as in-game items when I searched certain Adventure Sync rewards. I'm kind of at this point where I can be more private online and hide my location from Google, or I can turn this on and get like 30 Pokeballs and an egg a week, which is good for the game. So
we both know what Adam's going to do.
So this is how they get you, right? Give you an advantage that you can only get by having tracking on. So I knew about this trade-off when I turned it on, but I didn't really realize that it was going to be Google that was going to have that information. But I'm still thinking about what I'm going to do about that. So privacy is well and good, but, companies like to do alluring things to try to get your information. I get a bit frustrated, for example, when I do a DuckDuckGo search for a local business and it doesn't turn up as easily as it does in Google, because Google knows my location and it compromises my privacy to be able to tailor the search results to me. So sometimes it's actually useful to have your privacy compromised just a bit. You just got to kind of decide how comfortable you are with that. While advertising tracking cookies are browser specific, this gets more complicated with behemoths like Google, Facebook, and Amazon, which can link your browsing data to your account and track it across devices, meaning that those ads you get from an earlier website visit or search will follow you from your computer to your phone to your tablet. And this is where things can get a bit annoying. I'm browsing on my computer. It's on my phone. Maybe my wife's there while I'm looking on my phone, and it's a gift for her. So that can be tricky. I always go back to gift for her because it's, a less compromising sort of example.
It's what you're really doing.
So how common are these? This is, people might wonder. The most common is Google Analytics, which in 2016 was on 61% of websites. Second was Google DoubleClick, that's their ads. And third was Google G-Static, something which is used for loading content faster. Now, Google owns 7 of the top 10 most common third-party cookies, so Google's tracking you a lot. And there are a lot of smaller trackers with little coverage. Out of 81,000 third-party domains, only 123 of them were on more than 1% of websites. Only Google, Facebook, and Twitter are on more than 10% of websites. Now, obviously, when you're less than 1%, you're not doing much. But when you're talking around the 10%, even close to 10%, if you've got just a percentage of someone's browsing history, you can actually get a good idea, because it's a subset, a little random sampling of what you're doing. You can get a good idea of what a person's interested in when it comes to targeting ads, and maybe people aren't comfortable with that. Now, news websites, as I mentioned earlier, are the ones with the most trackers present, and I think this mostly is because that's their business model. Print media is starting to die. These news websites need to get money somehow. A lot of them are starting to put up their paywalls, but it's just ads. They're just saturated in ads because it's the only thing they can do. And the ads are not paying them simply to show the ad, but to track you, because that information is what's worth money to them. So privacy is a massive thing, and so what I've covered here can only really scratch the surface. And now it's difficult to stay on top of all the potential threats to our privacy, and it seems harder to have online privacy with every passing day. Making an effort to go over your web browser and device's privacy functions is a good idea. And something as simple as occasionally clearing your cookies and limiting third-party cookies will likely go a long way to helping hide your browsing history from some companies. Reviewing what apps are able to use your location data on your phone is also a good idea, and one should probably occasionally check out the privacy and security settings on their social media accounts to make sure they're to their liking.
Thanks, Adam, and thanks for joining us once again. Today we covered some listener mail about gaslighting, which provided some useful context on some of the content of Adam's previous segment. And Christina looked into whether Aura readings are cool again, and sadly, for some people they are, even though they shouldn't be.
They're not cool on TRC. Let's just put it out there.
I'm getting a cold front regarding the Auras. I covered comedy NDAs and asked you to try to consider the idea of it independent of where the source may come from. And Adam gave us a nice overview about how websites track your browsing history, and as he just said, perhaps just block the third-party cookies and see how that works for you. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
Stay classy, not smartassy.
We'll talk to you next week, everyone.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.